The wind wakes you before the sun. Not because it is loud. Not because anything has broken during the night. But because the cold has found a way through the tiny cracks between the logs of your cabin and settled quietly around your blanket. For a few moments you remain still. The room is dark. The fire that burned brightly before bedtime has faded into a bed of glowing embers. A faint orange light flickers across the ceiling beams. Outside, something brushes against the wall. Perhaps a branch moving in the wind. Perhaps snow sliding from the roof. You cannot be sure. The wilderness beyond the cabin is hidden beneath darkness. And winter. If you had arrived here from the future, you might wonder a simple question. How did frontier families survive winters like this? How did ordinary people endure months of freezing temperatures, deep snow, long nights, and isolation when the nearest town might be many miles away? Tonight you are about to find out. Because you are not visiting the frontier. You are living here. You are waking beside the fire. You are gathering wood before the storms arrive. You are listening to the wind move through endless forests. And over the coming months, you will experience winter exactly as thousands of frontier families once did. But before we settle beside the hearth for the long season ahead, take a moment to subscribe if you enjoy these quiet journeys into the past. And now, pull your blanket a little closer. Listen to the fire. And allow the modern world to slowly drift away. The year is somewhere in the late 18th century. The exact date hardly matters. Out here, life follows the seasons more closely than calendars. Your family lives on a small homestead carved from the edge of a vast American forest. The cabin is simple. Hand-cut logs form the walls. Clay and mud fill the spaces between them. The roof is steep enough to shed heavy snow. There is only one main room. Everything happens here. Cooking, eating, sleeping, working. During winter, this room will become the center of your entire existence. But winter has not fully arrived yet. Autumn still lingers across the landscape. The mornings are cold. The afternoons remain pleasant. Leaves drift from maple and oak trees, covering the ground in shades of gold and red. The beauty is impossible to ignore. Yet nobody spends much time admiring it. Because everyone knows what comes next. Winter on the frontier is not something that surprises people. It announces its arrival months in advance. And every family spends autumn preparing for the test ahead. You begin most mornings before sunrise. A thin mist hangs above the fields. The air smells of damp earth and fallen leaves. When you step outside, your breath is already visible. Across the clearing, the woodpile waits. Or rather, the future woodpile. At the moment, it is nowhere near large enough. Every day, more trees must be cut. More logs split. More firewood stacked. The work begins immediately after breakfast. Axes rise and fall. The sharp sound echoes through the forest. Wood chips scatter across the ground. Fresh cut oak releases a rich scent into the cool air. Hours pass. The sun climbs higher. Sweat gathers beneath your heavy shirt despite the chilly weather. It feels strange to be sweating while preparing for snow. Yet that is the reality of frontier life. Much of surviving winter happens before winter ever arrives. By afternoon, a growing wall of split logs stands beside the cabin. Children carry smaller pieces. Adults haul heavier loads. Nobody complains. Every armful of wood represents warmth during some future January night. Every stack of firewood is a little insurance against the cold. As the days pass, attention turns toward food. The garden has reached the end of its season. Corn stands dry and ready. Pumpkins rest among dying vines. Beans hang from brittle stalks. Harvesting becomes a daily routine. Baskets fill steadily. Corn ears rustle together as they are carried home. Potatoes emerge from dark soil. Squash accumulates near the cabin wall. Nothing is wasted. Nothing can be wasted. Winter has a way of exposing every mistake. Food that seems plentiful in October can appear frighteningly scarce by February. Inside the cabin, preservation begins. Strings of onions hang from ceiling beams. Bundles of herbs dry near the hearth. Apple slices rest on racks. Corn kernels fall steadily into wooden containers. The sounds become familiar. The scrape of a knife. The crackle of fire. The soft conversation of family members working late into the evening. Outside, smoke drifts upward from curing fires where strips of meat hang slowly drying. The scent carries across the clearing. Rich. Smoky. Comforting. Every preserved meal represents a future day of survival. Every jar, sack, and bundle becomes part of the family's defense against the months ahead. And with each passing sunset, winter draws closer. The harvest does not end when the crops are gathered. In many ways, it is only beginning. One cold autumn afternoon, baskets of apples cover nearly every available surface inside the cabin. The sweet smell fills the room. Red apples. Green apples. Small apples with blemishes that would never appear in a market far in the future. Out here, appearances matter very little. Winter cares only whether food exists. You sit at the table with a knife in your hand. One apple after another is sliced into thin pieces. The work is simple. Almost peaceful. Yet it continues for hours. The pile beside you slowly grows. Outside, leaves drift from the trees. Inside, the afternoon passes to the steady rhythm of cutting and sorting. By evening, your fingers are sticky with juice. The room smells sweet. The slices are carefully arranged on drying racks near the warmth of the hearth. Over the coming days, moisture will slowly leave them. When winter arrives, these apples will taste very different from fresh fruit. Chewier. Less vibrant. Yet during a February snowstorm, they may feel like a treasure. The next day belongs to corn. Large baskets wait near the table. Golden ears fill them completely. The family gathers together. Hands move steadily. Kernel after kernel falls into waiting containers. The sound becomes strangely hypnotic. A constant pattering that continues throughout the afternoon. No one rushes. There is no need. The work will take as long as it takes. Outside, the sun moves across the sky. Inside, the pile of kernels grows steadily larger. Each one represents a future meal. A future winter evening. A future moment when snow is falling outside and food is needed inside. Later in the season, attention turns toward meat. The smokehouse stands a short distance from the cabin. Its scent reaches you before you arrive. Wood smoke. Rich and earthy. The smell clings to clothing. Strips of meat hang from wooden poles overhead. The fire below burns slowly. Never too hot. Never too cold. Just enough smoke to preserve what winter might otherwise take away. You step inside. The air feels different here. Dim. Warm. Filled with drifting smoke. Hours of preparation have already gone into this process. And many more hours still remain. Nothing happens quickly. Preservation requires patience. The frontier often requires patience. As the days pass, shelves begin filling. Sacks of corn, dried apples, beans, onions, herbs hanging from ceiling beams. Everywhere you look, signs of preparation appear. The cabin slowly transforms. It begins looking less like a home preparing for winter and more like a home preparing to survive it. Some evenings, after the day's work is finished, you descend into the root cellar. The air immediately becomes cooler, darker. The smell of earth surrounds you. Potatoes rest in wooden bins. Turnips wait in neat rows. Squash occupies every available corner. A lantern flickers softly nearby. You pause for a moment and look around. Months of labor sit quietly in the darkness, stored against the future, stored against hunger, stored against winter. At the time, it is difficult to imagine eating all of it. The shelves seem full. The bins seem endless. But February is still far away. And winter, as every frontier family knows, has a remarkable appetite. A few days later, the first real cold front arrives. You notice it before sunrise. The air feels different. Sharper. Cleaner. Almost brittle. When you step outside carrying a bucket toward the well, the ground crunches beneath your boots. Thin frost coats every blade of grass. The field shimmers silver beneath the pale morning light. For a moment, the entire frontier seems frozen in place. No insects hum. No birds sing. Only the distant sound of an axe breaks the silence somewhere beyond the trees. You pull your coat tighter. Winter is getting closer. The days become increasingly organized around preparation. There is no wasted time. After breakfast, the family separates into familiar routines. Some continue gathering firewood. Others work on repairs. You spend part of the morning checking the cabin itself. Every small gap matters. Every crack matters. Cold has a remarkable ability to find weaknesses. You run your hand along the interior walls. Rough logs press against your fingertips. In several places, the clay filling between the logs has loosened. Those spaces must be sealed before heavy snow arrives. Buckets of mud and clay are prepared. Carefully, the gaps are filled. The work is slow, messy, unremarkable. Yet months later, during the coldest nights of winter, these simple repairs may mean the difference between comfort and misery. By afternoon, clouds drift across the sky. The sunlight grows softer. Long shadows stretch across the clearing. You pause beside the woodpile. It has become enormous. Rows upon rows of stacked oak, hickory, and maple stand drying beneath simple shelters. Still, nobody seems satisfied. There is always a feeling that more should be gathered. More prepared. More stored. The frontier teaches caution. The wilderness rarely rewards overconfidence. That evening, the family sits together around the hearth. The fire burns brightly. Warm orange light fills the room. Outside, darkness settles quickly. One by one, small tasks continue. A shirt is mended. A boot sole is repaired. A blanket receives another patch. The work is accompanied by quiet conversation. Stories drift through the room. Memories of previous winters. Accounts of deep snowstorms. Stories about travelers delayed for weeks. Children listen carefully. The adults listen too. Not because the stories are new, but because winter memories always feel more real when winter is approaching. Later, after everyone settles into bed, the wind begins to rise. You hear it first as a faint whisper outside. Then a soft moan moving through distant trees. Gradually the sound grows stronger. The cabin creaks. The roof groans softly. Nothing dangerous. Just the voice of the wilderness reminding everyone that it is still there. You pull the blanket higher and drift back towards sleep while the wind continues its slow conversation with the forest. The next morning, gray clouds cover the sky. The first snow arrives shortly after midday. At first, only a few flakes drift downward. Small. Gentle. Almost hesitant. You stop working and watch them fall. They settle quietly onto fence posts. Onto roofs. Onto fallen leaves. Soon the entire clearing is filled with drifting white specks. Children rush outside. Adults smile despite themselves. The first snowfall always feels different from those that follow. It still carries a hint of novelty. A hint of beauty. The hardships associated with winter have not yet arrived. For now, the snow simply transforms the landscape. The forest becomes quieter, softer, more peaceful. By evening, a thin white layer covers the ground. The rich smell fills the room. Fresh bread rests nearby. Everyone eats slowly. Nobody rushes. There is satisfaction in seeing the pantry stocked, in seeing wood stacked outside, in knowing preparations are nearly complete. Still, there is another feeling as well. A quiet awareness. Because everyone understands that this gentle snowfall is merely an introduction. The real winter has not arrived yet. Weeks pass. The landscape gradually changes. Snow comes and goes. Some days remain mild. Others feel bitterly cold. Streams begin freezing along their edges. Ice forms in shallow pools. The forest sheds the last traces of autumn. Bare branches reach toward pale skies. By late November, the frontier looks entirely different. The colorful world of autumn has disappeared. Everything has become shades of white, gray, and brown. One morning, you wake before dawn and notice complete silence. Fresh snow has fallen during the night. A deep blanket covers the landscape. Sound itself seems muffled. When you open the cabin door, cold air rushes inside. The clearing has vanished beneath white drifts. Fence lines barely remain visible. Animal tracks cross the snow in delicate patterns. A rabbit. Perhaps a fox. Something moved through the darkness while everyone slept. You stand quietly for a moment. Your breath forms clouds before your face. The forest looks endless, beautiful, and slightly intimidating. Because now winter has truly arrived. The routines begin changing immediately. Fetching water becomes more difficult. Travel becomes slower. Simple tasks require more effort. A short walk across the clearing now means pushing through snow. Wood must be carried indoors more frequently. Wet clothing must be dried near the fire. Boots require constant attention. Yet frontier families adapt quickly. Adaptation is part of survival. Every morning begins with the fire. Before breakfast. Before chores. Before anything else. Someone must revive the hearth. You kneel beside the ashes. A few glowing embers still survive beneath the gray surface. Carefully, dry kindling is added. Then smaller sticks. A gentle stream of air. Slowly, flames return. The first crackle of fresh firewood fills the room. Warmth begins spreading once again. The entire household seems to awaken with the fire. Without it, winter would dominate every corner of the cabin. With it, life continues. Outside, Snowflakes begin falling once more. Softly, steadily. The long season is only beginning. December arrives almost unnoticed. One storm follows another. The landscape grows deeper beneath layers of snow. Paths disappear. Fields vanish. Even familiar landmarks begin looking unfamiliar beneath their winter coverings. The cabin becomes more important than ever. You spend far more time indoors now. Not because work has ended, but because work has changed. Winter creates its own responsibilities. Every morning begins with familiar sounds. The crackle of firewood. The scrape of iron cookware. The quiet movement of family members waking beneath blankets. Outside, darkness often lingers long after everyone is awake. The days feel shorter now. The nights seem endless. A candle flickers on the table. Its small flame pushes back only a little darkness. Yet somehow it feels enough. Breakfast is simple. Perhaps cornmeal mush. Perhaps bread saved from earlier baking. Nothing elaborate. Just food capable of sustaining another cold day. Afterward, chores begin immediately. Firewood remains the most constant concern. No matter how large the woodpile seemed during autumn, it always appears smaller in winter. Every evening several armfuls disappear into the fireplace. Every morning more are carried indoors. You cross the snowy clearing countless times. Boots crunch through ice. Cold air stings your cheeks. Your breath rises in pale clouds. Sometimes snow falls while you work. Sometimes sunlight sparkles across the frozen landscape. Either way, the wood must be moved. The fire must continue burning. One afternoon, a storm begins arriving from the northwest. You notice the warning signs early. The sky darkens. Wind sweeps loose snow across the ground. Tree branches sway. The temperature drops rapidly. Everyone moves a little faster. Additional firewood is brought inside. Water buckets are filled. Animals are checked. Doors are secured. No one panics. Storms are part of frontier life. Preparation has become routine. By sunset, snow is falling heavily. The world outside the cabin disappears behind swirling white curtains. Wind rattles the walls. The roof creaks occasionally. Inside, however, the atmosphere feels surprisingly calm. The fire burns brightly. The kettle simmers gently. Shadows dance across log walls. Family members gather closer together. There is comfort in shared warmth. Comfort in knowing that the cabin was built for nights exactly like this. Hours pass. The storm intensifies. Snow strikes the walls with soft hissing sounds. Wind howls across the clearing. Yet gradually those sounds become background music. Part of the winter landscape. You listen while mending clothing beside the fire. Needle moving slowly through thick fabric. The room smells faintly of smoke and wool. Someone yawns. Another log settles into the fire. Outside, the storm continues. Inside, life continues too. Much of frontier survival depends on accepting conditions that cannot be controlled. The weather will do what it wishes. Snow will fall. Temperatures will drop. Wind will arrive without asking permission. Fighting these realities accomplishes nothing. Preparing for them accomplishes everything. By midnight, the storm reaches its strongest point. You wake briefly. The cabin is dark except for glowing embers. Wind presses against the walls. For a moment, you simply listen. The sound feels enormous. As if the entire wilderness is moving around the cabin. Yet the structure holds firm. The logs remain solid. The roof remains secure. Eventually you drift back to sleep, wrapped in blankets, protected by fire, surrounded by family. And beyond the walls, winter continues its long journey across the frontier. Morning arrives quietly after the storm. At first, you notice only the stillness. The wind that roared through the night has vanished. No branches scrape against the walls. No gusts push at the door. Only silence remains. You sit up beneath your blanket and look toward the hearth. A faint glow still survives among the ashes. Someone is already awake, carefully feeding kindling into the embers. Small flames begin to appear. The room slowly brightens. Outside, daylight is arriving. When the door finally opens, cold air rushes into the cabin. Everyone pauses. The storm has transformed the world. Snow lies deep across the clearing. Fence posts barely. You pull on boots and step outside. The snow reaches nearly to your knees in some places. Each step requires effort. The cold immediately bites at your face. Your breath drifts upward in pale clouds. Crossing the clearing now feels like crossing a much greater distance. The woodpile waits beneath its shelter. Snow hangs from the roof above it. You gather an armful of logs and begin the slow walk back toward the cabin. The wood feels heavier today. Everything feels heavier in winter. Inside, the warmth of the fire is especially welcome. The logs hiss softly as melting snow touches the hearthstones. Now it requires planning. Ice forms along the edges. Snow covers familiar routes. Buckets become heavier when fingers are numb from cold. You wrap a scarf around your neck and begin the walk. The forest stands silent around you. Every branch carries snow. Every sound seems amplified. The crunch of your boots echoes through the trees. A distant crow calls once. Then silence returns. When you reach the water source, thin sheets of ice have already formed. Carefully, they are broken apart. The dark water beneath looks almost black against the surrounding snow. You fill the bucket slowly. The surface ripples briefly before becoming still again. Then comes the journey home. The bucket swings gently as afternoon fades, clouds begin gathering once more. The daylight never seems to last long enough. Winter afternoons disappear almost as soon as they arrive. Shadows lengthen across the snow. The temperature begins falling again. Animals are checked before darkness arrives. A small barn stands nearby. Its interior smells of hay and livestock. The air inside feels surprisingly warm compared to the world outside. The animals depend on the family just as much as the family depends on them. They provide milk. Sometimes meat. Sometimes labor. Keeping them healthy through winter is essential. Fresh hay is spread. Water is checked. Doors are secured against the cold night ahead. The work feels repetitive. But repetition is part of survival. The frontier is built upon ordinary tasks performed consistently. One evening after supper, snow begins falling once more. Not a storm. Just a gentle snowfall. You sit near the fire and watch through the small window. Flakes drift slowly through the darkness. The sight feels peaceful. Almost hypnotic. Inside the cabin, candlelight flickers softly. Someone spins wool. Someone else repairs a tool handle. Children grow sleepy beside the warmth of the hearth. Outside, winter continues building its quiet kingdom. Night after night. Storm after storm. Snow layer upon snow layer. By the middle of December, travel becomes increasingly rare. The nearest settlement still exists. The neighboring farms still exist. But they feel much farther away now. Distance changes during winter. 5 miles can feel like 20. A short journey may consume an entire day. People leave home only when necessary. The wilderness demands respect. Especially this time of year. One afternoon, footprints appear near the edge of the clearing. Large footprints. Not human. You discover them shortly after sunrise. A line of tracks crosses the snow before disappearing into the trees. Perhaps a deer. Perhaps something else. The forest remains active even during winter. Most of its inhabitants simply move more quietly now. The tracks remind you of something frontier families always understood. The wilderness never truly sleeps. Even beneath snow. Even beneath ice. Life continues. Hidden. Patient. Watching. That evening, the temperature drops lower than it has all season. The cold arrives gradually. At first, the cabin feels normal. Then everyone notices the difference. The walls feel colder. The floor feels colder. The air near the door feels colder. Extra logs disappear into the fireplace. More blankets are brought out. The family gathers closer together. Outside, stars shine brilliantly in the clear winter sky. Their light reflects from the snow. The landscape glows faintly beneath the moon. Beautiful. Silent. Freezing. You wake sometime during the night. The fire has burned low. The room feels cool. For a moment, you simply listen. A log settles quietly. Someone breathes softly nearby. Beyond the walls, nothing moves. The entire frontier seems frozen beneath moonlight. You pull your blanket closer. The wool feels rough against your skin. Yet it holds precious warmth. Slowly, your eyes close once again. And winter continues its long march through December. As the days approach Christmas, the frontier settles into a pattern. Each morning begins the same way. The fire is revived. Breakfast is prepared. Water is carried. Animals are tended. Firewood is brought indoors. The tasks rarely change. Yet somehow the days never feel exactly alike. The weather ensures that. One morning arrives bright and clear. The next arrives beneath heavy gray clouds. One day the snow sparkles beneath sunlight. Another day the wind drives icy crystals across the landscape. You learn to pay attention to these changes. Weather shapes everything. Even moods. A sunny winter afternoon can feel surprisingly cheerful. A week of gray skies can make the cabin seem smaller than it really is. The family works hard to keep spirits steady. Stories help. Music helps. Conversation helps. After supper, evenings often become the most pleasant part of the day. The hardest work is finished. The fire burns steadily. Candles cast warm circles of light. Outside, darkness covers the wilderness. Inside, the cabin feels safe. Protected. Separate from the cold world beyond its walls. Sometimes stories are shared. Stories about relatives. Stories about earlier winters. Stories about long journeys and distant places. The children listen carefully. Even the adults enjoy hearing familiar tales again. Winter has a way of making old stories feel new. Perhaps because the season itself moves slowly. There is time to listen. Time to remember. Time to sit quietly beside the fire. One evening, snow begins tapping softly against the window. You look outside. Large flakes drift downward through the darkness. The scene is beautiful. The forest has disappeared behind a curtain of white. The only visible light comes from the cabin itself. Golden firelight spilling onto fresh snow. For a moment, the entire frontier seems reduced to one small circle of warmth surrounded by endless winter. And somehow, that feels comforting. Christmas arrives without great ceremony. Frontier life leaves little room for extravagance. Yet the day still feels special. Work is lighter. Meals are a little better. Perhaps a treasured food saved for the occasion appears on the table. Perhaps a pie. Perhaps preserved fruit. Perhaps something sweet rarely enjoyed during ordinary days. Simple pleasures carry tremendous value here. The laughter around the table feels warmer. The stories last longer. The evening feels brighter. Outside, snow continues falling gently. Inside, gratitude fills the room. Not for abundance, but for survival. For shelter. For food. For family. For another winter faced together. When the holiday passes, January begins approaching. And everyone knows what that means. The hardest part of winter is still ahead. The days after Christmas pass quietly. No great events arrive. No dramatic changes occur. And yet these may become some of the most memorable days of the entire winter. Snow covers the clearing. The forest stands silent. The sun appears briefly before slipping away once again. Life settles into the cabin. For hours at a time, the outside world seems very far away. One morning you wake to the sound of spinning wool. The wheel turns steadily near the fire. Soft. Rhythmic. Almost musical. The sound blends with the crackling of the hearth. Together they create the soundtrack of a winter morning. You remain beneath your blanket for a moment and listen. No wind today. No storm. Only the quiet sounds of people working. The sounds of a household continuing its life despite the season beyond the walls. After breakfast, everyone returns to familiar tasks. Winter creates long evenings and short days. The available daylight is precious. Nothing is wasted. A shirt requiring repair is brought forward. A worn blanket receives another patch. A mitten develops a new thumb where the old one finally wore through. You sit near the window where the light is strongest. Needle in hand. Thread moving carefully through cloth. The work is slow. Patient. The kind of work that rewards attention rather than speed. Outside, snowflakes begin drifting downward. Not enough to matter. Just enough to soften the landscape. You glance toward the window occasionally. The world beyond the glass seems calm. Muted. Almost dreamlike. Inside, the room remains warm. The smell of wood smoke lingers in the air. A kettle hangs above the fire. Steam curls lazily upward. The scent of herbs occasionally drifts from the simmering water. Hours pass. No one seems to notice. Winter has a way of changing time. Summer races forward. Winter lingers. An afternoon can feel wonderfully long. By late afternoon, shadows stretch across the room. Candles are prepared before darkness arrives. Their importance cannot be overstated. Once the sun disappears, firelight and candlelight become the only barriers against the night. One candle is lit. Then another. Golden circles of light appear across the cabin. The atmosphere changes immediately. The room feels smaller. Warmer. More intimate. Outside, darkness settles over the frontier. Inside, the evening begins. Someone starts telling a story. Not because there is an audience waiting. Not because entertainment has been scheduled. But because winter evenings naturally invite stories. The tale unfolds slowly. A hunting trip remembered from years ago. A traveler caught in an unexpected storm. A bear encountered near a creek long before this homestead existed. You listen while working. Others listen while mending. The story fills the room without demanding complete attention. Like the fire. Like the wind. Like winter itself. Later, bread is prepared for the next day. The smell gradually spreads through the cabin. Warm. Rich. Comforting. You watch the loaves bake while darkness presses gently against the windows. For a few moments, the entire world seems contained within these walls. The fire. The bread. The candles. The family. Everything else can wait until morning. And perhaps that is the hidden gift of winter. The season narrows life to its essentials. Warmth. Food. Shelter. Companionship. The things that matter most become impossible to ignore. As December settles deeper over the frontier, the evenings seem to grow longer than anyone remembers. Darkness arrives early. Sometimes it feels as though the sun has barely appeared before it begins slipping away once again. By late afternoon, the forest outside the cabin turns gray. Soon afterward, it disappears entirely. The windows become dark mirrors reflecting firelight back into the room. The wilderness beyond them vanishes. Only the cabin remains. One evening, snow begins falling shortly before sunset. You notice it while carrying in the final armful of wood for the day. Large flakes drift silently through the air. The forest beyond the clearing slowly fades behind a curtain of white. By the time you return indoors, the world already looks softer, quieter, more distant. You brush snow from your coat and hang it near the hearth. Tiny drops of water begin forming immediately. The warmth inside the cabin feels especially welcoming tonight. The fire burns steadily. Its light dances across the walls. The smell of smoke mixes with the scent of drying wool and fresh bread. Outside, winter is gathering strength. Inside, life continues at its own pace. After supper, candle making becomes the evening's work. A pot of melted tallow sits near the fire. The smell is not particularly pleasant. Yet no one complains. Candles mean light. And light means the difference between a useful evening and a long darkness. Lengths of wick are dipped carefully into the warm liquid. Then lifted. Allowed to cool. Dipped again. And again. Each layer grows slightly thicker. The process requires patience. There is no shortcut. You watch the candle slowly take shape. A simple object. Yet one that will illuminate countless winter nights. The work feels strangely satisfying. Outside, snow continues falling. Inside, the future is being prepared one candle at a time. Nearby, clothing hangs from a line stretched across part of the room. A recent washing has left socks, shirts, and blankets drying in the warmth of the cabin. The smell of damp wool drifts through the air. Occasionally someone shifts a garment closer to the fire. Winter laundry is never easy. Water must be heated. Clothing takes longer to dry. Everything requires more effort than it would during summer. Yet clean clothes remain a small luxury worth the trouble. As the evening deepens, the youngest members of the household find quiet ways to pass the time. A simple game. A carved wooden toy. A guessing contest built entirely from imagination. Nothing elaborate. Nothing expensive. The frontier leaves little room for excess. Yet boredom is surprisingly rare. People create their own entertainment. Stories, games, conversation, music when someone happens to know a tune. The cabin becomes its own small world. Self-contained. Warm against the cold. At some point, someone begins reading aloud from a treasured book. Perhaps a Bible. Perhaps a collection of stories that has survived many journeys. The pages are worn from years of use. The voice rises and falls softly beside the fire. You listen while staring into the flames. The words blend with the crackle of burning wood, with the hiss of melting snow sliding from the roof outside, with the occasional sigh of winter wind moving through distant trees. The effect is soothing, almost hypnotic. Time loses its sharp edges. Minutes drift into hours. No one seems eager for the evening to end. There is comfort here. Comfort in the routine. Comfort in the familiar faces illuminated by candlelight. Comfort in knowing that everyone is safe indoors while snow covers the wilderness beyond the walls. Eventually, one by one, the candles are extinguished. Small flames disappear into darkness. Only the hearth remains. Its orange glow pulses gently across the room. Blankets are spread. Boots are set aside. The final log of the evening settles into the fire with a shower of sparks. Outside, snow continues falling through the night, covering the clearing, covering the paths, covering the endless forest. But inside the cabin, beneath warm blankets and fading firelight, winter feels almost peaceful. The storm can wait until morning. Tonight there is only the gentle crackle of the hearth, and the quiet certainty that the family will face whatever tomorrow brings together. A few days after the last snowfall, the cabin awakens to a different kind of work. Not woodcutting. Not mending. Not preserving food. Today is laundry day. A task simple in theory. Much less simple in winter. Before sunrise, water is carried indoors. Bucket after bucket. Each one cold enough to numb your fingers. The water is poured into large iron kettles and suspended above the fire. Soon the cabin begins filling with warmth and steam. The windows grow cloudy. Tiny droplets gather along the glass. The room feels different from usual. Softer somehow. The sharp dryness of winter gives way to gentle humidity. For hours, clothing is washed. Shirts, stockings, blankets, aprons. Work clothes that have endured weeks of smoke, snow, and daily labor. The work is slow. Hands move steadily through warm water. Soap is rubbed into fabric. Stains receive extra attention. Nothing is rushed. Every item of clothing matters. Replacing garments on the frontier is not easy. Care and maintenance become a way of preserving valuable possessions. As the morning continues, ropes are stretched across the cabin. Freshly washed clothes hang above the hearth. The room begins resembling a forest of cloth. Shirts sway gently in rising warmth. Wool socks drip steadily into waiting basins below. The scent of soap mixes with wood smoke. The combination is oddly pleasant. By afternoon, even the blankets are being aired. You lift one near the doorway. Cold winter sunlight falls across its surface. For a moment, the fabric glows softly. Clean. Dry. Ready for another season of use. Later, attention turns toward bathing. Another task made difficult by winter. Water must be heated. Privacy arranged. Towels prepared near the fire. The process takes time. Yet the reward feels worth every effort. There is a particular comfort in feeling warm and clean during the coldest months of the year. That evening, the cabin feels transformed. Fresh clothes, clean blankets, warm firelight, the smell of soap lingering faintly in the air. Outside, winter remains unchanged. Snow still covers the ground. Cold still fills the forest. But inside, everything feels renewed. For one peaceful evening, the hardships of the season seem slightly lighter. And as darkness settles beyond the windows, the family gathers beside the hearth once more. Wrapped in clean wool, surrounded by warmth, listening to the gentle crackle of burning wood while winter waits patiently outside. January arrives beneath a sky the color of iron. The change is not marked by a calendar hanging on a wall. No one gathers to announce the new month. Instead, you notice it in the cold. The cold feels deeper now, more determined, as though winter has finally settled into the land and intends to stay. One morning, you wake before dawn and immediately sense the difference. The cabin is colder than usual. The fire still glows faintly, but its warmth does not reach as far as it did in December. You remain beneath your blanket for a few extra moments. The wool traps precious heat. Outside the covers, the air feels sharp against your face. Nearby, someone quietly adds fresh wood to the fire. The flames slowly return. Orange light begins dancing across the walls. Gradually, the room comes back to life. Yet even after breakfast, the cold remains. You feel it beneath the door. You feel it through the floorboards. You feel it whenever you step near the window. Winter is now at its strongest. Outside, the world seems frozen solid. Snow squeaks beneath your boots as you cross the clearing. The sound is different from ordinary crunching. Drier. Sharper. A sound that comes only during the coldest weather. Your breath forms thick clouds before your face. The air stings your nose. Even simple tasks require determination. The woodpile, once enormous, has begun to shrink noticeably. Not alarmingly. Not yet. But enough for everyone to notice. Each evening, several more logs disappear into the fireplace. Each morning, another armful must be carried indoors. The rhythm never stops. Sometimes, while hauling wood, you pause for a moment and look across the snow-covered landscape. The forest stands silent. Tall trunks rise from white drifts. Their bare branches stretch into the pale sky. Nothing moves. At least, nothing visible. The wilderness appears asleep. Yet you know better. Tracks often appear overnight. Rabbits. Foxes. Deer. Occasionally something larger. The snow records their journeys while the family sleeps. Every morning brings a new collection of stories written across the ground. One day, after a fresh snowfall, you discover deer tracks near the edge of the clearing. Several animals pass through during the night. Their hoofprints form a winding path between the trees. You follow the trail with your eyes until it disappears into the forest. For a moment, you imagine them moving through the moonlit wilderness. Silent. Careful. Searching for food beneath the snow. Winter challenges every living thing. Not only people. The animals are enduring the same season. The same cold. The same hunger. The same endless nights. Back at the cabin, the afternoon is spent indoors. The weather has turned unpleasant. Wind rattles the walls. Fine snow blows through the air outside. Not enough to create a major storm. Just enough to make outdoor work uncomfortable. So the family turns its attention to indoor tasks. These winter projects help pass the long hours. Tools are repaired. Clothing is mended. Rope is braided. Wooden handles are smoothed and reshaped. You sit near the hearth while working. The warmth reaches your hands. The smell of smoke fills the room. A kettle simmers gently above the fire. Occasionally, someone opens the lid and a cloud of fragrant steam rises into the air. The simple scent feels comforting. Familiar. Home. Hours pass this way. The wind continues outside. The fire continues inside. The contrast between the two worlds is impossible to ignore. Beyond the walls lies cold and uncertainty. Within them lies warmth and routine. As darkness approaches, candles are lit. Their small flames glow softly against the growing shadows. The room becomes golden and peaceful. Supper is prepared. Nothing extravagant. Perhaps a stew made from preserved vegetables and stored meat. Perhaps coarse bread baked earlier in the week. The meal is simple. But after a cold day, it feels deeply satisfying. Everyone eats slowly. No one rushes. The evening stretches comfortably ahead. Later, after the dishes are cleared away, stories return. Winter always seems to encourage storytelling. Perhaps because darkness arrives so early. Perhaps because there are fewer distractions. Or perhaps because stories create a sense of warmth that fire alone cannot provide. You listen while someone describes a winter from years ago. A winter when snow buried fences entirely. A winter when travelers disappeared for days. A winter remembered precisely because it was so difficult. The tale unfolds slowly. Nobody interrupts. Outside, the wind occasionally brushes against the cabin. Inside, the fire crackles softly. The combination is strangely soothing. Eventually, one by one, family members begin preparing for sleep. Candles are extinguished. Blankets are arranged. The room grows darker. The fire continues glowing. A guardian against the night. You settle beneath heavy covers. The mattress beneath you is simple. Not especially soft. Yet exhaustion makes comfort easier to find. Your eyes begin to close. The last thing you hear is the steady crackle of burning wood. Then sleep arrives. And beyond the cabin walls, January continues. Several days later, a storm arrives unlike any you have seen so far this winter. The warning begins early. The sunrise never truly appears. Gray clouds blanket the sky from horizon to horizon. The air feels heavy. Still. Waiting. Even the forest seems unusually quiet. You notice the feeling while carrying water. The birds are absent. The wind has vanished. Nothing stirs among the trees. The wilderness appears to be holding its breath. By midday, the first snow begins falling. Large flakes drift lazily downward. For a while, the snowfall seems harmless. Beautiful, even. The flakes settle gently on roofs and fence posts. Children watch from the doorway. The world grows whiter with every passing hour. Then the wind arrives. At first, only a breeze. Soon something stronger. Snow begins moving sideways. Visibility shrinks. The distant tree line fades behind swirling white curtains. Everyone understands what is happening. A serious storm is coming. Preparations begin immediately. Extra wood is brought inside. Water containers are filled. Animals are checked one final time. Doors are secured. Blankets are gathered closer to the hearth. The routine has been practiced many times before. Nobody panics. Yet there is urgency in every movement. By sunset, the storm is fully underway. Snow hammers against the cabin. Wind roars across the clearing. The sound is constant, relentless. The walls creak occasionally beneath powerful gusts. You sit near the fire and listen. The noise outside feels enormous, as if the entire wilderness has come alive. The storm dominates every other sound. It fills the night. It fills your thoughts. Yet despite its power, the cabin remains sturdy. The thick log walls hold firm. The roof endures. The fire continues burning brightly. Hours pass. The storm grows stronger. At times, the wind produces strange sounds. Low whistles. Deep moans. Sudden bursts that resemble distant voices. The forest creates its own music during winter storms. And tonight it is performing endlessly. Eventually, darkness deepens. The family settles in for the night. No one expects much sleep. Storms like this have a way of making themselves known. You lie beneath blankets listening to snow strike the roof. Listening to the wind sweep across the frontier. Listening to the fire crackle steadily nearby. The sounds blend together, gradually becoming part of a single rhythm. At some point during the night you wake briefly. The storm is still raging. Yet something feels different. Warmer. You realize why. Several family members have moved closer to the hearth. Blankets overlap. Bodies share warmth. It is a simple response to winter. A practical response. People survive difficult seasons together. The realization feels comforting. You close your eyes again. The storm continues. The fire continues. And somewhere beyond the swirling darkness, the frontier waits patiently for morning. When morning finally arrives after the great storm, no one is surprised to find the world buried. What surprises you is how completely it has disappeared. The cabin door opens only a short distance before meeting resistance. Snow presses against it from the outside. For a moment, nobody says anything. Then the family begins digging. Shovelful by shovelful. The door slowly opens wider. Bright sunlight spills into the room. And beyond it lies a landscape transformed beyond recognition. The drifts are enormous. Snow rises against the walls of the cabin. Fence posts have vanished entirely. The path to the barn is gone. Even familiar trees appear strange beneath the weight of winter. The storm has erased nearly every sign of the world you knew a few days ago. The work of clearing begins immediately. Yet by afternoon, fresh snow starts falling once again. Not another blizzard. Just enough to undo part of the morning's progress. The realization settles quietly over everyone. Travel will not be possible for some time. The family is effectively alone. Not in a frightening way. Simply in a frontier way. The nearest neighbors still exist. The nearest settlement still exists. But for now, they may as well be on the far side of the world. Days pass. The cabin becomes the center of everything. You wake beside the fire. You eat beside the fire. You work beside the fire. You fall asleep beside the fire. The room that once felt ordinary now contains nearly your entire universe. Outside, winter rules unquestioned. Inside, life continues. The mornings develop a familiar rhythm. Someone revives the embers. Someone prepares breakfast. Someone brushes snow away from the doorway. The routine repeats itself day after day. Steady. Reliable. Comforting. Yet there are moments when the isolation becomes noticeable. One afternoon, You stand beside the window and look outside. Snow drifts lazily across the clearing. The forest is barely visible through the white haze. No travelers appear. No distant voices carry through the air. No wagons pass along hidden roads. The wilderness feels endless. For several minutes you simply watch. The scene is beautiful. Yet there is also a strange feeling that comes from seeing nothing move except snow. The frontier has become very quiet. That evening, darkness arrives early. Candles are lit. Supper is served. The fire burns brightly. Outside, the wind begins rising again. Not enough to worry anyone. Just enough to remind the family that winter remains in charge. As the hours pass, stories fill the room. Old stories. Favorite stories. Stories everyone has heard before. Nobody seems to mind. The familiar tales feel comforting. Like old blankets. Like familiar songs. Like the steady glow of the hearth itself. Later, after everyone has settled beneath blankets, you wake briefly during the night. The cabin is dark except for glowing embers. For a moment, you simply listen. A log shifts quietly in the fireplace. Wind brushes the walls. Someone turns over in their sleep. Beyond that, nothing. The silence feels immense. The nearest neighbor could be awake right now, tending a fire of their own, listening to the same wind, watching the same winter moon. And yet the snow places an entire wilderness between you. The thought lingers for a moment, then fades. Because winter on the frontier often means accepting solitude. Not fighting it. Not fearing it. Simply living with it. You pull the blanket a little closer. The wool feels warm. The fire still glows softly. The cabin remains secure. And somewhere beyond the darkness, snow continues drifting across the sleeping frontier. Several more days pass before the weather finally begins to settle. The storms weaken. The wind softens. Yet winter itself remains unchanged. This is the part of the season people rarely speak about. Not the first snowfall. Not the great blizzards. Not the arrival of spring. But the long middle. The stretch of winter that seems determined to last forever. Each day looks remarkably similar to the one before it. You wake in darkness. You tend the fire. You carry wood. You fetch water. You eat. You work. You sleep. Then the pattern begins again. At first, the routine feels comforting. Eventually, it begins to feel endless. One morning, while reaching for a sack of corn, you notice something. The sack is noticeably lighter than it was a month ago. Not empty. Far from it. Yet lighter. The observation follows you throughout the day. Later, you notice similar changes elsewhere. Fewer dried apples remain on the shelf. One barrel contains less than before. A stack of firewood has become shorter. These are not alarming discoveries. The supplies are lasting exactly as intended. Still, winter leaves visible evidence of its passing. It consumes slowly. One meal. One log. One candle at a time. The water bucket presents another challenge. On especially cold mornings, a thin layer of ice forms across its surface. You break it apart before filling a kettle. The sound echoes through the cabin. Sharp. Brittle. A small reminder of the temperatures waiting outside. Even simple tasks become slightly more difficult during January. Boots take longer to dry. Clothing feels colder when first put on. Fingers grow stiff more quickly. Nothing dramatic. Just countless small inconveniences accumulating day after day. The meals become familiar too. Stews made from preserved vegetables, cornmeal, stored meat, dried fruit. The food remains welcome. Yet everyone can remember autumn's fresh harvest. The memory feels distant now, like another lifetime. One evening, while snow falls lightly beyond the window, you find yourself staring into the fire. The flames move endlessly, shifting, curling, collapsing, reforming. Hours seem capable of passing while watching them. Perhaps that is why frontier families spent so much time near the hearth. The fire provided more than warmth. It provided company. A living presence during the longest nights. Outside, a sound suddenly drifts through the darkness. Faint, distant, easy to miss. You pause and listen. There it is again. A long cry carried by the wind. Perhaps a wolf. Perhaps several. The sound echoes across the frozen landscape before fading into silence. No one appears frightened. The wilderness has always contained such voices. Still, the cry leaves an impression. A reminder that beyond the circle of firelight lies another world. A colder world. A wilder world. A world continuing its own struggle against winter. Later that night, you lie awake for a few moments before sleep arrives. Your thoughts drift toward spring. Toward green fields. Flowing water. Warm sunlight. The smell of fresh earth. You are not wishing winter away. Not exactly. But after so many weeks, it becomes pleasant to imagine what comes next. Eventually your eyes close. The fire crackles softly nearby. Snow rests against the cabin walls. The frontier sleeps beneath the winter sky. And somewhere in the distance, though nobody can see it yet, spring continues moving slowly closer. As January stretches onward, you begin noticing something about winter nights. They seem longer than nights should be. Not because the hours themselves have changed, but because darkness settles so completely across the frontier. Once the sun disappears, the wilderness beyond the cabin might as well belong to another world. The forest vanishes. The fields vanish. Even the familiar path to the barn disappears beneath shadow and snow. Only the cabin remains. A small island of firelight surrounded by miles of darkness. One particularly cold evening, the temperature drops lower than anyone expected. You can feel it even before stepping outside. The windows are edged with thick frost. Tiny crystals spread across the glass in delicate patterns. The corners of the cabin feel colder. The floorboards seem to hold the chill. The fire burns steadily, yet winter presses against every wall. After supper, extra logs are carried indoors. No one wants to make unnecessary trips outside after dark. The wood is stacked neatly beside the hearth. Enough for the night. Enough, hopefully, until morning. As evening deepens, the family settles into familiar routines. A shirt is patched. A tool handle is smoothed with a knife. Someone slowly shells the last of a basket of corn. The sounds are quiet. Comfortable. The kind of sounds that become part of a home. Outside, the wind has disappeared entirely. The silence feels unusual. Almost too complete. When you finally step outdoors for a moment before bed, the reason becomes clear. The sky is perfectly clear. Thousands of stars shine overhead. The snow reflects their light. The clearing glows faintly beneath the moon. Everything appears frozen in place. You stand there for several moments, breathing cold air. listening. The silence is extraordinary. No birds. No insects. No rustling leaves. Only the occasional creak of a distant tree adjusting to the cold. The wilderness feels vast beyond imagination. And yet, beneath the stars, it also feels peaceful. When you return inside, warmth greets you immediately. The contrast never becomes ordinary. The difference between indoors and outdoors during January is the difference between comfort and hardship, between shelter and exposure, between survival and risk. Before sleep, one final task remains. The fire must be prepared for the night. This responsibility never disappears. Throughout winter, someone always pays attention to the hearth. A neglected fire can leave a cabin bitterly cold before dawn. Fresh logs are positioned carefully. Not too many. Not too few. The goal is a slow, steady burn. Something that will survive until morning. The process feels almost ceremonial now. A routine repeated hundreds of times. A routine every frontier family understands. You watch the flames settle around the new wood. Sparks drift upward. Orange light dances across the ceiling beams. For a few moments, nobody speaks. The fire commands quiet attention. Perhaps because everyone understands how important it is. Perhaps because watching flames has become one of winter's simplest pleasures. Eventually, blankets are unfolded. Candles are extinguished. The cabin darkens. Only the hearth remains visible. Its glow pulses softly through the room. You settle onto your bed and close your eyes. Hours later, sometime after midnight, you wake briefly. The cabin is silent. The fire has burned lower. Only glowing embers remain. For a moment, you consider the people sleeping around you. The neighbors hidden beyond the snowy forest. The travelers who may be sheltering somewhere tonight. The countless frontier families spread across the wilderness. Each one gathered around its own fire. Each one enduring the same season. The thought is strangely comforting. Winter can feel lonely. Yet no one is truly alone. All across the frontier, small fires continue glowing in the darkness. Tiny islands of warmth scattered across an ocean of snow. The image follows you back into sleep. And outside, beneath the stars, January continues its long and silent watch. By the final weeks of January, winter feels less like a season and more like a permanent condition. Snow has covered the land for so long that it becomes difficult to imagine anything else. Children struggle to remember the color of the fields. Adults speak of planting season almost as though discussing a distant memory. The world has narrowed to white snow, gray skies, dark forests, and the warm glow of the cabin. Yet life continues. As it always does. One afternoon, while carrying water from the creek, you notice the tracks of a fox crossing the snow. The prints form a neat line leading into the trees. You stop for a moment. The tracks are fresh. Made only hours earlier. The fox is somewhere nearby. Moving through the same winter landscape. Searching for food. Searching for shelter. Living one day at a time. The sight stays with you. Winter demands persistence from every creature. Not only people. Back at the cabin, the afternoon unfolds slowly. A pot hangs above the hearth. Steam rises steadily. The room smells of onions, dried herbs, and wood smoke. The scent has become the smell of winter itself. Weeks ago, you hardly noticed it. Now it feels inseparable from the season. Sometimes, while sitting beside the fire, you find your thoughts wandering. Not toward dramatic dreams. Not toward distant adventures. towards simple things. A warm breeze, green grass, the sound of rain instead of snow, the sight of leaves moving in sunlight. Small memories suddenly feel valuable after months of cold. And yet there is no impatience in these thoughts. Only curiosity. A quiet wondering about how much longer winter intends to stay. One evening, a light snow begins falling shortly before sunset. You watch it through the window. The flakes drift lazily downward. The same sight that has greeted the family countless times already. Yet something feels different. The snowfall no longer seems endless. It no longer feels like the beginning of winter. Instead, it feels like part of a season already well underway. Already moving toward its conclusion. The realization is subtle. Almost impossible to explain. But everyone senses it. Even if no one says it aloud. That night, while lying beneath blankets, you listen to the familiar sounds of the cabin. The crackling fire. The gentle breathing of sleeping family members. The occasional whisper of wind outside. The sounds have become so familiar that they feel timeless. As though they have always existed. As though they always will. Yet you know that is not true. Spring is coming. The snow will melt. The windows will open. The fire will burn less often. The long evenings beside the hearth will become memories. For now, however, winter still remains. And so you close your eyes. The fire glows warmly nearby. Snow falls softly beyond the walls. And the frontier drifts through another peaceful January night. The knock comes unexpectedly. 3 firm taps against the cabin door. Everyone looks up at once. Visitors are rare during the heart of winter. Especially after weeks of deep snow. For a moment, the room falls silent. Then someone rises and opens the door. A rush of cold air enters immediately. Standing outside is a neighbor. His coat is dusted with snow. His beard carries tiny crystals of frost. His boots are nearly hidden beneath packed white powder. The journey here has clearly taken time. He steps inside with a grateful smile. The warmth of the cabin surrounds him almost instantly. Gloves are removed. Snow is brushed from his shoulders. A chair is offered near the fire. For several minutes little is said. The visitor simply sits quietly, allowing warmth to return to his hands. Everyone understands. The cold outside requires no explanation, simply the kind of information frontier families exchange whenever the opportunity arises. Reports about weather. Stories about livestock. News from neighboring settlements. Small details gathered over many weeks. You listen closely. Winter makes information valuable. When travel becomes difficult, even ordinary news feels interesting. The visitor shares stories from his journey. Snow-covered trails. Drifts taller than fences. Frozen creeks crossed carefully beneath pale skies. The images fill the room. For a while, the wilderness outside seems a little less distant. A hot meal is offered. Accepted gratefully. Steam rises from the bowl. The smell of stew fills the air. For a time, conversation blends with the crackle of the fire and the occasional gust of wind outside. The cabin feels livelier than usual. The long isolation of January eases slightly. A reminder that other families continue living beyond the snowy forest. Other fires burn. Other cabins glow in the darkness. Other people wait for spring. As afternoon slowly becomes evening, preparations for departure begin. The visitor cannot remain overnight. His own family waits at home. Scarves are wrapped tightly. Gloves are pulled on. The firelight reflects from the snow outside. Goodbyes are exchanged. Then the door opens once more. Cold air enters. The visitor steps into the fading daylight. For a few moments, you watch him move across the clearing. A solitary figure surrounded by snow. Gradually he disappears among the trees. The forest swallows the last traces of movement. And once again, winter quiet returns. The cabin grows still. Yet the silence feels different now. Less isolated. Less lonely. The visit has left behind a comforting reminder. No matter how vast the wilderness may seem, life continues beyond the horizon. Families endure. Fires burn. Neighbors remain. And somewhere across the snowy frontier, another cabin window glows warmly against the gathering night. Morning arrives slowly after the storm. At first, there is only silence. Not the ordinary quiet of winter. Something deeper. Heavier. The kind of silence that follows great wind and heavy snowfall. You open your eyes and immediately notice the difference. The cabin no longer creaks. No snow taps against the walls. No gusts move across the roof. The storm has finally passed. The fire is revived as darkness still lingers outside. Orange light spreads across the room. The familiar routine begins once more. Blankets are folded. Breakfast is prepared. Boots are pulled on. Yet everyone is curious about what waits beyond the door. When it finally opens, a wave of cold air enters the cabin. Then comes the sight. The clearing has disappeared. Snowdrifts rise almost waist-high in some places. Fence posts are nearly buried. The path to the barn no longer exists. Only smooth, white shapes remain where familiar landmarks once stood. For a moment, nobody speaks. The landscape feels transformed, as though an entirely new world has appeared overnight. Then the work begins. Snow must be cleared. Animals must be checked. Life cannot pause simply because winter has become more difficult. You step outside carrying a wooden shovel. The snow is light but deep. Each movement requires effort. The cold air burns in your lungs. Your boots sink with every step. Progress comes slowly. One narrow path at a time. Hours pass this way. A trail to the barn. A trail to the woodpile. A trail to the water source. Simple routes become essential lifelines. Without them, even the smallest chore becomes exhausting. By midday, sweat gathers beneath your coat despite the freezing temperature. You pause for a moment and lean against the shovel. The sky above is brilliantly blue. Sunlight sparkles across the snow. The beauty is undeniable. Yet beauty on the frontier often arrives hand in hand with hard work. The snow may look peaceful, but it demands respect. That afternoon, while carrying fresh wood indoors, you notice how different the cabin feels compared to the world outside. The warmth seems richer. The fire brighter. The smell of stew more inviting. Winter teaches appreciation for simple comforts. A warm room. Dry socks. A hot meal. Things easily overlooked during other seasons become precious now. As evening approaches, clouds begin turning pink and gold above the forest. The sunset reflects from the snow. The entire landscape glows softly. For a few brief moments, even the deepest drifts seem almost magical. Then darkness returns. And with it comes another long winter night. Inside, supper is served near the fire. Steam rises from bowls. The room fills with quiet conversation. Outside, temperatures fall rapidly once again. The snow that softened during daylight begins hardening beneath the cold. By bedtime, the world beyond the walls feels frozen solid. You settle beneath blankets and listen to the familiar sounds of the cabin. The gentle crackle of burning wood. The occasional shift of a log. The breathing of sleeping family members. These sounds have become part of winter itself. Reliable. Comforting. Constant. And in a season filled with uncertainty, constant things matter. Days continue passing, one after another. The frontier settles deeper into winter. Storms come and go. Snow accumulates. The woodpile shrinks. Food stores slowly decrease. Not dramatically. Not alarmingly. Just steadily. A sack of corn becomes a little lighter. A barrel holds a little less. A shelf appears slightly emptier than before. You notice these changes. Everyone does. No one speaks of them often. There is little point. The supplies were gathered for this exact purpose. This is why autumn was filled with work. This is why meat was cured. This is why vegetables were stored. Winter is the season of using what was saved. Still, each meal serves as a quiet reminder. Spring remains far away. And the family must continue being careful. One cold evening, snow begins falling again. Not heavily. Just enough to soften the landscape. You sit near the window and watch. The flakes drift lazily through the darkness. Firelight reflects faintly from the glass. For a moment, the scene feels almost dreamlike. Beyond the cabin lies an endless wilderness. Yet here, beside the hearth, there is warmth. There is shelter. There is light. And sometimes that is enough. By the middle of January, the long winter nights begin blending together. You wake in darkness. You eat breakfast in darkness. Often, the sun seems to disappear almost as soon as it arrives. The frontier feels smaller during these weeks. Not physically. Emotionally. The cabin becomes the center of everything. The forest remains beautiful. The snow remains impressive. Yet there are days when the world outside feels distant. Days when the warmth of the hearth becomes far more appealing than the frozen landscape beyond the door. One morning, the temperature drops lower than anyone can remember this season. The cold seems almost alive. Waiting outside. Pressing against the walls. Searching for weaknesses. You feel it immediately when stepping outdoors. The air bites exposed skin. Breathing deeply becomes uncomfortable. Even the snow sounds different beneath your boots. Sharp. Dry. Fragile. The family responds in familiar ways. More wood is burned. More layers are worn. Outdoor tasks are completed quickly. Nobody lingers outside longer than necessary. Even the animals seem quieter. They remain close to shelter, conserving energy, waiting for warmer days. That afternoon, clouds gather unexpectedly. By sunset, light snow begins drifting downward. The flakes are tiny, almost powder-like. The wind carries them in twisting patterns across the clearing. You stand in the doorway for a moment and watch. The scene feels peaceful. Yet you know how deceptive winter can be. The same snow that looks beautiful tonight may become tomorrow's obstacle. Every snowfall adds weight to roofs. Every snowfall makes travel harder. Every snowfall increases the distance between one homestead and another. Still, there is no resentment. Only acceptance. Winter is not viewed as an enemy. It is simply part of life. A season to be endured. A season to be respected. A season that eventually passes. Later that evening, a visitor arrives. Not an expected visitor. Not a stranger either. A neighbor. The journey through snow has taken hours. His coat is covered with frost. His boots are packed with snow. The arrival brings excitement to the cabin. Winter visits are rare. Chairs are moved closer to the fire. Food is shared. Stories are exchanged. News travels slowly on the frontier, especially during winter. A visitor becomes a connection to the wider world. You listen while conversations unfold. Reports from neighboring farms. Stories about weather. News of livestock. Rumors of spring still many weeks away. Nothing extraordinary. Yet every detail feels interesting. When communities are separated by miles of wilderness, even ordinary information carries value. The visitor remains through supper. The room feels livelier than usual. Laughter appears more frequently. The long winter seems slightly less isolated. Eventually, preparations are made for the journey home. Lantern light flickers near the doorway. Scarves are wrapped tightly. Goodbyes are exchanged. Then the visitor disappears into the snowy darkness. The cabin grows quiet once more. Yet a pleasant feeling remains. A reminder that other families are enduring the same season. Other fires are burning tonight. Other cabins are glowing against the winter darkness. Other people are waiting patiently for spring. The thought is comforting. Before bed, you step outside for a final look at the night. The snowfall has ended. The sky is clear. Thousands of stars shine overhead. Their light reflects faintly across the snow-covered ground. The forest stands motionless, silver beneath moonlight. For several moments, you simply stand there, breathing cold air, listening to the silence, feeling very small beneath the enormous winter sky. Then you return indoors, close the door, and settle once again beside the fire. January is not yet finished. But somewhere beyond the cold horizon, spring is slowly moving closer. By the time February settles over the frontier, something begins to change inside the cabin. Not outside. Outside, the landscape looks much the same as it has for weeks. Snow still covers the fields. Ice still grips the creek. Cold mornings still greet every sunrise. The change happens within the people living through it. Winter has become tiring. Not frightening. Not overwhelming. Simply tiring. The season has lasted a long time. Long enough for routines to become deeply familiar. Long enough for every task to feel repeated 100 times. You wake before dawn and immediately know what the day will contain. The fire. The water. The wood. The animals. The same path through the snow. The same shelves of stored food. The same view through the window. There is comfort in routine. But there is also weariness. One afternoon, while preparing a meal, you notice how familiar everything has become. The same dried apples. The same cornmeal. The same preserved vegetables. The same smoked meat. Months ago these supplies felt reassuring. Now they feel ordinary. No one complains. Everyone understands their value. Without them, winter would be impossible. Yet memories of autumn's harvest begin returning more often. Fresh apples. Fresh bread from newly milled grain. Vegetables pulled directly from the garden. The memory feels almost luxurious now. A reminder of another season. The family continues working. Tasks continue being completed. But conversations sometimes grow quieter. Not because anything is wrong. Simply because winter has been present for so long. The days blend together. Monday feels like Thursday. One snowfall resembles the next. A week passes almost unnoticed. Then another. The season stretches onward. One evening, while staring into the fire, you realize that nearly everyone in the room is doing the same thing. No one is asleep. No one is unhappy. Everyone is simply resting. Watching the flames. Listening to the crackle of burning wood. The fire has become a companion during these long months. A source of warmth. A source of light. A source of movement in a season where so much else remains still. Outside, snow begins falling again. The sight no longer inspires excitement. Only acceptance. Winter is doing what winter does. You watch the flakes drift downward beyond the window. And for a brief moment, you find yourself wondering what the clearing will look like when all of this finally melts away. The thought lingers longer than expected. Because spring has started appearing more frequently in everyone's imagination. Several days later, the weather remains cold. Yet something feels different. The change is subtle enough that you almost miss it. One afternoon, while carrying firewood toward the cabin, a drop of water lands beside your boot. You stop. Look upward. Another drop falls. Then another. Tiny droplets slide from a row of icicles hanging along the roof. The sunlight is strong enough to melt them. Only for a few hours. Only during the warmest part of the day. Yet the sight feels remarkable. You stand there watching for a moment. Listening. Drip. 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 The sound is almost musical after months of silence and ice. Later that week, another sign appears. A patch of dark earth emerges beside the cabin. The snow retreats from a small section of ground. Not much. Only a few feet. Yet everyone notices. Children notice. Adults notice. Even passing glances seem drawn toward it. Because after so many months of white, the sight of exposed earth feels extraordinary. One morning, while walking toward the creek, you hear something unexpected. A bird. Just one. Its call lasts only a few seconds. Then the forest becomes silent once more. Still, the sound follows you throughout the day. Winter remains firmly in control. Yet the wilderness has begun whispering about what comes next. The hints continue appearing. Sunlight lingers slightly longer each evening. The cabin remains bright for a few extra minutes. The sky glows later. Shadows arrive more slowly. Tiny changes. Almost impossible to measure. Yet impossible to ignore. One evening, conversation around the fire turns naturally toward spring. Not because anyone planned it. The topic simply arrives. Seeds. Gardens. Fences needing repair. Fields waiting beneath snow. Plans for future work. Future harvests. Future seasons. Months earlier, such discussions would have felt distant. Now they feel realistic. Possible. Close enough to imagine. That night, before going to sleep, you step outside. The air remains cold. Snow still covers most of the clearing. The forest remains locked in winter. Yet something feels different. Perhaps it is the longer daylight. Perhaps it is the dripping water. Perhaps it is simply hope. You stand quietly beneath the stars for a moment, breathing the cold night air, listening to the stillness. And somewhere deep inside, you know something important. Winter is no longer arriving. Winter is no longer growing. Winter is beginning to leave. Very slowly. Very quietly. But leave nonetheless. By the time February arrives, winter no longer feels new. The beauty of the first snowfall has long since faded into familiarity. The excitement of storms has softened into routine. Snow is simply part of the world now. Ice is simply part of the world. Cold is simply part of the world. You wake one morning and realize you can no longer remember what the fields looked like before winter arrived. The fences. The grass. The muddy paths. Everything has been hidden beneath snow for so long that the white landscape feels permanent. Outside, dawn arrives beneath a pale gray sky. A faint light spreads across the horizon. The forest stands motionless. Every branch wears a thin coating of frost. Even the smallest twigs sparkle in the morning light. The scene is beautiful. Yet February brings its own challenge. Weariness. Not dramatic hardship. Not disaster. Just the quiet fatigue that comes from living with winter for so many months. The family still completes every chore. The fire is still maintained. The animals are still fed. The water is still carried. But everyone seems slightly slower now. The season has been long. And spring remains distant enough to feel uncertain. One afternoon, while bringing wood indoors, you stop beside the shrinking pile. For several moments, you simply look at it. Back in autumn, the stack seemed enormous. Almost endless. Now there are noticeable gaps. The shelter covers more empty space than before. There is still enough. You know there is still enough. Yet the sight reminds you how much winter has already consumed. Thousands of small fires. Thousands of warm moments. Thousands of crackling logs. The season leaves its mark on everything, including the woodpile. That evening, snow begins falling again. A gentle snowfall. Almost silent. You watch it through the window while sitting near the hearth. The flakes drift slowly downward through the darkness. The sight feels familiar now. Comforting even. The frontier has a way of changing your relationship with weather. Things that once seemed inconvenient become ordinary. Things that once seemed ordinary become precious. A clear day. A dry pair of boots. A full bowl of stew. A warm place beside the fire. Winter teaches gratitude in small ways. As the snowfall continues, the room grows quieter. One by one, family members focus on their evening tasks. A piece of clothing is repaired. A tool handle is sanded smooth. A basket receives a new weave. The work is repetitive. Yet there is satisfaction in it. The long winter evenings provide time for things that summer rarely allows. Time to mend. Time to repair. Time to prepare for future seasons. Outside, darkness settles heavily across the wilderness. The snow absorbs sound. The forest becomes nearly silent. Even the wind seems tired. You add another log to the fire and watch sparks briefly rise up the chimney. The flames dance across the hearth. Orange. Gold. Occasionally blue near the base. The sight never becomes boring. Throughout winter, fire remains a companion. A source of warmth. A source of light. A source of comfort. Perhaps even a source of hope. Much of frontier life revolves around that glowing hearth. People gather around it. Work beside it. Eat beside it. Sleep near it. On the coldest nights, it feels almost alive. A small sun hidden inside the cabin, protecting everyone from the frozen world outside. Later that night, snow continues falling. You wake briefly and glance toward the window. Moonlight glows faintly through the frosted glass. The room is quiet. The fire has settled into glowing embers. Everything feels still, peaceful. For a few moments you simply listen. Then sleep returns once more. And another winter day quietly passes into memory. A week later, something changes. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough to be noticed. The sunlight feels different. One afternoon, while walking back from the woodpile, you pause unexpectedly. The sun sits low above the trees. Yet its warmth lingers slightly longer than before. Only a little. Barely enough to mention. Still you notice. Others notice too. No one says much. Experience has taught caution. The frontier has seen false springs before. Warm days followed by blizzards. Melting snow followed by bitter cold. Winter does not surrender easily. Yet small signs begin appearing. A drip of water falls from the roof during midday. A patch of exposed earth appears near a south-facing wall. Snow softens briefly beneath sunlight before freezing again at night. The changes are subtle. Easy to miss. But they are there. One morning, while carrying water, you hear something unexpected. Birdsong. Only a few notes. Short. Distant. Yet unmistakable. You stop walking. The sound comes again. Then disappears. The forest falls silent once more. Still, the moment stays with you. A reminder that winter will not last forever. The wilderness is already preparing for what comes next. That evening, conversation around the fire feels slightly different. Attention has begun shifting toward the future. Not entirely. There is still winter to endure. Still snow to shovel. Still wood to burn. Yet thoughts of spring have started returning. The garden is mentioned. Seeds are discussed. Repairs needed before planting season are remembered. Months ago, such conversations would have felt premature. Now they feel natural. Hope is slowly entering the room. Outside, however, February remains determined. Several days later, another storm arrives. Snow sweeps across the frontier. Wind rattles the walls. The landscape disappears behind swirling white clouds. Winter reminds everyone that it is still in control. You spend the day indoors. The storm is too strong for unnecessary travel. The fire burns continuously. The room grows warm and comfortable. A kettle sings softly above the flames. The smell of soup fills the air. Outside, the storm continues. Hour after hour. Yet the mood inside the cabin remains calm. Perhaps because the family knows something now that it did not know in December. Winter is finite. The season feels powerful. Sometimes endless. Yet deep down, everyone understands the truth. Spring is coming. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not next week. But soon enough. And that knowledge changes everything. That night, after the storm begins fading, you step outside for a moment. Fresh snow covers the clearing. The sky has cleared. Stars shine brightly overhead. Cold air fills your lungs. For a few seconds you simply stand there, looking across the moonlit landscape. The wilderness remains beautiful. The snow remains deep. The winter remains strong. Yet somewhere beneath the frozen ground, another season is already waiting. Patient. Quiet. Drawing closer with every passing day. The first true sign of change arrives on an ordinary morning. Not with a dramatic thaw. Not with fields suddenly turning green. Instead, it arrives as a sound. A slow, steady dripping from the edge of the roof. You hear it while stepping outside shortly after sunrise. At first, you do not pay much attention. Winter has filled the months with countless sounds. Wind through trees. Snow against walls. Ice cracking along the creek. But this sound feels different. You stop and listen. Drip. 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 Tiny drops of water fall from a row of icicles hanging above the doorway. The sunlight touches them directly. Each drop catches the light before disappearing into the snow below. For several moments, you simply watch. The change seems small. Almost insignificant. Yet after so many weeks of frozen stillness, it feels important. The season is beginning to loosen its grip. Not surrender. Not yet. But loosen. Over the following days, similar signs begin appearing everywhere. The snow covering the cabin roof grows thinner. Paths become slightly easier to walk. The southern sides of trees reveal dark patches of exposed bark where snow no longer clings. The afternoons stretch a little longer. The sun remains visible a little later. Each change is tiny. Yet together they create a feeling that has been absent for months. Expectation. One afternoon, while carrying water, you notice something remarkable. The creek is moving more freely. Ice still covers much of its surface. But along the edges, narrow channels of flowing water have appeared. The sound reaches your ears before you see it. A gentle trickling. Soft and persistent. You stand quietly beside the bank. Listening. The creek has been nearly silent throughout much of winter. Now it has found its voice again. The sound feels almost cheerful. Like an old friend returning after a long absence. Back at the cabin, the mood continues shifting. Conversations increasingly focus on the future. The garden. The fields. Repairs that must be completed before planting season. Tools that need sharpening. Fences that need attention. Winter is still present. But people are beginning to look beyond it. One evening, while sitting near the hearth, you realize something else has changed. The fire no longer feels quite so desperate. During January, the hearth seemed like a barrier against the hostile world. A shield protecting the family from relentless cold. Now it feels different. Still important. Still comforting. But no longer the only thing standing between survival and hardship. The cabin itself feels lighter. The atmosphere softer. Even the shadows seem less heavy. Outside, however, winter refuses to leave quietly. A final cold snap arrives near the end of the month. Temperatures drop. The wind returns. Snow falls once more. For a day or two, it feels as though January has returned. The family responds exactly as it always has. More wood on the fire. More layers of clothing. More determination. Yet something has changed. The storm no longer feels endless. No one believes it will last forever. The confidence is subtle. But it is there. Because now everyone has seen the signs. The dripping icicles. The flowing water. The longer days. Winter has revealed its weakness. And once that happens, it becomes difficult to fear it in the same way. The storm passes. Sunlight returns. And with it comes another afternoon of melting snow. You stand outside and close your eyes for a moment. The sunlight touches your face. Not warm exactly, but warmer. Warmer than it was a month ago. Warmer than it was 2 months ago. The difference is enough to make you smile. Somewhere above, a bird crosses the pale sky. Its call drifts across the clearing. Brief. Lonely. Beautiful. Then it disappears into the distance. The sound lingers long after it is gone. A promise carried on the wind. Spring is getting closer. March arrives quietly. The snow remains. The cold remains. Yet winter no longer feels invincible. Everywhere you look, signs of change continue appearing. The clearing around the cabin grows patchy. White snow alternates with dark earth. Small streams of meltwater cross familiar paths. Mud begins returning to places that have been frozen for months. The transformation happens gradually, day by day, almost too slowly to notice. Then suddenly, one morning, you realize the landscape looks different. The world is waking up. The process is messy. Winter leaves reluctantly. The neat blanket of snow that once covered everything begins breaking apart. Drifts shrink. Ice cracks. Water pools in low places. Boots become muddy. The clean white world of January gives way to something rougher and less predictable. Yet nobody complains. Mud is a welcome problem. Mud means warmth. Mud means change. Mud means life returning. One afternoon, while walking toward the creek, you hear rushing water. Not the gentle trickle from a few weeks earlier. Something stronger. The creek has swollen with melting snow. Water moves quickly between its banks. Chunks of ice drift along the current. The sound fills the air. Energetic. Restless. Alive. You stand on the bank and watch. The movement feels almost shocking after months of stillness. Winter was a season of quiet. Spring announces itself through motion. The trees are changing too. Not dramatically. Not yet. Their branches remain mostly bare. But tiny buds have begun appearing. Small signs of future leaves. Promises waiting patiently for warmer days. Birds become more common. Their songs return gradually. A few notes one morning. Several more the next. Soon the forest feels less empty. Less silent. Life is returning from every direction. Back at the homestead, activity increases. The long indoor season is ending. Tools are inspected. Garden plots are discussed. Repairs postponed during winter finally receive attention. The family spends more time outdoors. Not because chores demand it, but because being outside feels good again. Fresh air no longer stings quite as sharply. Sunlight lingers later into the evening. The frontier seems larger now. During winter, the cabin became the center of existence. Now the world beyond its walls is calling once again. One evening, you sit outside as the sun begins setting. The snow-covered months feel strangely distant, though they are not far behind. The forest glows golden beneath the fading light. Water drips steadily from branches. A soft breeze moves through the trees. The smell of damp earth rises from the ground. You realize you have not smelled earth in a very long time. For months, everything smelled of snow. Smoke. Cold air. Now a different scent has returned. The scent of growing things. The scent of spring. As darkness settles, you look toward the cabin. Smoke rises gently from the chimney. The same cabin that sheltered the family through blizzards. Through freezing nights. Through endless weeks of snow. It looks smaller now than it did during winter. Less like a fortress. More like a home. And somehow that feels exactly right. The hardest season has nearly passed. The family endured. The fire kept burning. The food lasted. The roof held. The winter that once seemed endless is becoming a memory. And a new season waits just beyond the horizon. One morning, you wake before sunrise and immediately sense that something is different. The cabin is quiet. The fire glows softly. A faint light appears at the window. Yet it is not the light that catches your attention. It is the air. The cold is still present. But it no longer dominates everything. Winter has finally begun to retreat. You step outside carrying no particular task. No bucket. No armful of wood. No urgent responsibility. Just curiosity. The eastern sky glows pale gold. Mist rises from patches of exposed ground. The snow survives only in scattered drifts beneath shaded trees. Everywhere else, the earth has returned. Dark. Damp. Ready. The forest feels different too. Birdsong echoes from several directions. Branches sway gently in the morning breeze. Somewhere nearby, water flows steadily through the creek. The frontier is awake again. For a long moment, you simply stand there. Watching. Listening. Breathing. The winter seems impossible to measure now. It was built from countless ordinary moments. Carrying wood. Mending clothes. Fetching water. Listening to storms. Gathering around the fire. Sharing meals. Watching snow fall beyond the window. None of those moments felt historic. None felt extraordinary. Yet together they formed an entire season. A season survived through preparation, patience, and routine. That is the secret you discover after living through a frontier winter. People did not survive because they were fearless. They survived because they prepared. Because they worked together. Because they completed small tasks every day. One armful of wood. One repaired blanket. One bucket of water. One meal at a time. The great challenge of winter was overcome through ordinary actions repeated faithfully. As the sun rises higher, golden light spreads across the clearing. The cabin casts a long shadow. The forest glows softly. A pair of birds land near the edge of the field. The creek sparkles between patches of melting ice. Everywhere you look, the world is beginning again. And as you stand there in the cool spring air, you realize something else. The frontier winter was difficult. Sometimes exhausting. Sometimes lonely. Yet it also carried its own quiet beauty. The sound of snow falling at night. The warmth of a fire during a storm. The comfort of candlelight on dark evenings. The feeling of family gathered close while the wilderness slept outside. Those memories remain. Long after the snow is gone. Long after the woodpile is empty. Long after spring arrives. The season leaves its mark. Not only on the land, but on the people who lived through it. You take one last look across the clearing. The winter world that greeted you months ago has vanished. In its place stands a frontier preparing for another year. Another planting season. Another harvest. Another autumn. And eventually, another winter. But that is still far away. For now, the snow is melting. The birds are singing. The sun is rising. And the long frontier winter has finally come to an end. The fire still burns softly behind you. The forest stretches endlessly ahead. And somewhere between the two, a new season begins.